Good day, Coach Jude. Good day, everyone. My name is Kish Mahandag, and meet my group mates. And my role on this video presentation is to give the overall introduction. Today, we will discuss about the learning principle. But before that, here are some objectives. First, identify the different theories. Give 2 to 3 facts about each and the corresponding learning principles. Second, describe each learning principles. Third, explain briefly each of the learning principles. Lastly, give example each of the learning principle as applied in the classroom setting or real-life situation. We are also going to share our insight before we will end our presentation. So, let's start with our discussion. Please, Ms. Norjeline Baharod.
Hi, my name is Norjeline S. Baharod. I discuss about psychoanalytic and psychosexual theory of Sigmund Freud. And I discuss also about cognitive development theory of Jean Piaget. So let's dive into the first theory of personality called the psychoanalytic theory. Now you've probably heard of someone super famous in the psychology world named Sigmund Freud. Well, it so happens, fun fact here, that Freud was not even a psychologist. He was a physician, more specifically a neurologist. And in 1885, he went to Paris to study hypnosis with a fellow neurologist, but this experience is actually what turned him towards medical psychopathology and psychiatry. As we know, it was actually unknown at the time began work. Psychoanalytic theory is the theory of personality, organization, and the dynamics of personality. Development that guides psychoanalysis, a clinical method for treating psychopathology. First lead out by Sigmund Freud in the late 19th century, psychoanalytic theory has undergone many refinements since his work. The psychoanalytic theory came to full prominence in the last third of 20th century as part of the flow of critical discourse regarding psychological treatments after the 1960s, long after Freud's death in 1939. Sigmund Freud maintained that the personality consists of 3 different elements: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the aspect of personality that is driven by internal and basic drives and needs. These are typically instructual, such as hunger, thirst, and the drive for sex or libido. The id also the unconscious and stems from our instinctive abilities. The id acts in accordance with the pleasure principles, in that it's avoid pain and seek pleasure. Due to the instructual quality of the id, it's impulsive and often unaware of the implication of actions. The ego is driven by the reality principles. The ego works to balance the id and the superego. By trying to achieve the id's drive in the most realistic ways, it seeks to rationalize the id instinct and please the drives that benefit the individual in the long term. It helps separate what is real and realistic of our drives, as well as being realistic about the standards that the superego sets for the individual. Additionally, the ego is how we view ourselves. This is conscious but not always true. For example, someone could believe they are the best looking person in the world. However, this is just an opinion they have, and not everyone will agree with that belief. The superego is driven by their morality principles. It acts in connection with the morality of higher thought and action. Instead of instinctively acting like the id, the superego works to act in socially acceptable ways. It employs morality, judging our sense of wrong and right, and using guilt to encourage socially acceptable behavior. Furthermore, the superego comes from the people around us. They affect what we believe in and how we view things. So this can be different depending on how you were raised and the culture you were around. The superego is also responsible for finding the happy medium between the id and ego. The id can sometimes be overly dominant when there are humanistic urge. The ego can be very unrealistic in terms of how we view ourselves. According to Freud's psychoanalytic theory, all psychic energy is generated by the libido. Freud suggested that our mental states were influenced by two competing forces, catexis and anti-catexis. Catexis was described as an investment of mental energy in person, an idea or an object. Anti-catexis involved the ego blocking the socially unacceptable need of the id. According to Freud's theory, there is only so much libidinal energy is devoted to suppressing urge via anti-catexis. There is less energy for other processes. Freud compared the mind to an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg that is actually visible above the water represents just a tiny portion of the mind, while the hug expanse of ice hidden underneath the water represents the much larger unconscious. The 5 stages of psychosexual development are: the first is the oral stage, the libidinal energies are focused on the mouth. Second, the oral stage, the libidinal energies are focused on the anus. Third is the phallic stage, the libidinal energies are focused on the penis or clitoris. Fourth is the latent stage, a period of calm in which little libidinal interest is present. And the fifth is the genital stages. The libidinal energies are focused on the genitals. The successful completion of each stage leads to a healthy personality as an adult. If, however, a conflict remains unresolved at any particular stage, the individual might remain fixated or stuck at that particular point of development. Freud theory and work with psychosexual development lead to neo-analytic or neo-Freudians who also believe in the importance of the unconscious dreams interpretation, defense mechanism, and the integral influence of childhood experiences, but had objection to the theory as well. They do not support the idea that development of the personality stops at age 6. Instead, they believe development so reads across the lifespan. They extended Freud's work and encompass more influence from the environment and the importance of conscious thought along with the unconscious. The most important theories are Erik Erikson's psychosocial development, Anna Freud, Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, and Karen Horney, including the School of Object Relations. Erikson's psychosocial development theory is based on 8 stages of development. The stages are trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generatively versus stagnation, and integrity versus despair. These are important to the psychoanalytic theory because it describes the different stages that people go through life. Each stage has a major impact on their life outcomes, since they are going through conflicts at each stage, and whichever route they decide to take will have certain outcomes.
Jean Piaget was a Swiss psychologist and genetic epistemologist. He is most famous known for his theory of cognitive development that look at how children develop. Theory of cognitive development suggests that intelligence changes as children grow. A child's cognitive development is not just about acquiring knowledge, that has to develop or construct a mental model of the world. Jean Piaget was born in Switzerland on August 9, 1896. He began showing an interest in the natural sciences at a very early age by age 11. He had already started his career as a researcher by writing a short paper on an albino sparrow. He continued to study the natural sciences and received his PhD in zoology from the University of Neuchâtel in 1918. Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that children move through to 4 different stages of intellectual development, which reflect the increasing sophistication of children's thought. Each child goes through the stages in the same order in child. Development is determined by biological maturation and interaction with the environment. At each stage of development, the child's thinking is qualitative different from the other stages. That is, each stage involves a different type of intelligence. It occurs through the interaction of innate capacities and environmental events, and children pass through a series of stages. Piaget stages are: first is sensorimotor stage. It is birth from 18 months to 24 months. The sensorimotor stage is the first stage of development, lasts from birth to approximately age 24 months. At this point in development, children know the world primarily through their senses and motor movements. The pre-operational stage is the second stage of the development, lasts the ages of 2 to 7, and is characterized by the development of language and the emergence of symbolic play. The concrete operational stage, the third stage of cognitive development, lasts from the age of 7 to approximately age 11. At this point, logical thought emerged, but children still struggle with abstract and theoretical thinking. Formal operation stage in the fourth and final stage of cognitive development, lasting from age 2 to into adulthood. Children become much more adept at abstract thought and deductive reasoning. And now let's proceed to psychosocial theory and socio-cultural theory.
Hi, I'm Shimin Omar Salili. So third, we have psychosocial theory of development by Erik Erikson, and fourth, we have sociocultural theory by Lev Vygotsky. So Erikson maintained that personality develops in a predetermined order through 8 stages of psychosocial development from infancy to adulthood. During each stage, the person experiences a psychosocial crisis, which could have a positive or negative outcome for personality development. While sociocultural theory grew from the work of seminal psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who believed that parents, caregivers, peers, and culture at large were responsible for developing higher order functions. According to Vygotsky, learning has its basis in interacting with other people. Psychosocial theory consists of 8 stages of development. We have trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, integrity versus despair. So, stage 1, trust versus mistrust. The first stage of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development occurs between birth and 1 year of age. It is the most fundamental stage in life because an infant is utterly dependent. Developing trust is based on dependability and quality of the child's caregiver. So, at this point in development, the child is utterly dependent upon other caregivers for everything they need to survive, including food, love, warmth, safety, and nurturing. If caregiver fails to provide adequate care and love, the child will come to feel that they cannot trust or depend upon the adults in their life. Stage 2, autonomy versus shame and doubt. The second stage of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development takes place during early childhood and is focused on children developing a greater sense of personal control. The role of independence at this point in development, children are just starting to gain a little independence. They are starting to perform basic actions on their own and making simple decisions about what they have preferred. By allowing kids to make choices and gain control, parents and caregivers can help children develop a sense of autonomy. So the outcomes here, children who struggled and who are shamed for their accidents may be left without a sense of personal control. Success during the stage of psychosocial development leads to feelings of autonomy. Failure results in feelings of shame and doubt. Finding balanced children who successfully complete this stage feel secure and confident. The third stage of psychosocial development takes place during the preschool years. At this point in psychosocial development, children begins to assert their power and control over the world through directing play and other social interactions. Children who are successful at this stage feel capable and able to lead others. Those who fail to acquire skills are left with a sense of guilt, self-doubt, and lack of initiative. So the outcomes of this is the major theme of the third stage of psychosocial development is that children needs to begin asserting control and power over the environment. Success in this stage leads to a sense of purpose. Children who try to exert too much power experience disapproval, resulting a sense of guilt. Stage 4, industry versus inferiority. The fourth psychosocial stage takes place during the early school years from approximately ages 5 to 11. Through social interactions, children begin to develop a sense of pride in their accomplishments and abilities. Children need to cope with new social and academic demands. Success leads to to a sense of competence, while failure results in feelings of inferiority. So the outcomes here, children who are encouraged and commended by parents and teachers develop a feeling of competence and belief in their skills.
Stage 5, identity versus confusion. The fifth psychosocial stage takes place during the often turbulent teenage years. This stage plays an essential role in developing a sense of personal identity, which will continue to influence behavior and development for the rest of a person's life. Teens needs to develop a sense of self and personal identity. Success leads to an ability to stay true to yourself, while failure leads to role confusion and a weak sense of self. So let me ask you, what is identity? When psychologists talk about identity, they are referring to all of the beliefs, ideals, and values that help shape and guide a person's behavior. Completing this stage successfully leads to fidelity, which Erikson described as an ability to live by society's standards and expectations. While Erikson believed that each stage of psychosocial development was important, he placed a particular emphasis on the development of ego identity. So why identity is important? Our personal identity gives each of us an integrated and cohesive sense of self that endures through our lives. Our sense of personal identity shaped by our experiences and interactions with others, and it is this identity that helps guide our actions, beliefs, and behaviors as we age. Stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. Young adults need to form intimate, loving relationships with other people. Success leads to strong relationships, while failure results in loneliness and isolation. This stage covers the period of early adulthood when people are exploring personal relationships. Erikson's believed it was vital that people could develop close, committed relationships with other people. Those who are successful in this step will form relationships that are enduring and secure. Stage 7, generativity versus stagnation. Adults need to create or nurture things that will outlast them, often by having children or creating a positive change that benefits other people. Success leads to feelings of usefulness and accomplishment, while failure results in shallow involvement in the world. During adulthood, we continue to build our lives, focusing on our career and family. Stage 8, integrity versus despair. The final psychosocial stage occurs during old age and is focused on reflecting back on life. At this point in development, people look back on the events of their lives and determine if they are happy with the life that they live or if they regret the things that they did or didn't do. Erikson's theory differed from many others because it addressed development throughout the entire lifespan, including old age. Older adults need to look back on life and feels a sense of fulfillment. Success at this stage leads to feelings of wisdom, while failure results in regrets, bitterness, and despair. So the outcomes here, those who are unsuccessful during this stage will feel that their life has been wasted and may experience many regrets. The person will be left with feelings of bitterness and despair. Those who feel proud of their accomplishments will feel a sense of integrity. Successfully completing this phase means looking back with few regrets and a general feelings of satisfaction. These individuals will attain wisdom even when confronting death. Erikson adopted the belief from Sigmund Freud that development is characterized by a series of stage-related conflicts between two perspectives. He believed that you must hold both perspectives in order to achieve identity strengths, which he defined as virtues. For example, Yang Jung-won received a 90 in his final grade and received great feedback from his mother and teachers as a result. So he can show more his confidence. As a result, he became more motivated to learn. Vygotsky emphasized the influence of culture, peers, and adults on developing a child. He believed that children will acquire ways of thinking and behaving that make up a culture by interacting with more knowledgeable person. Theory suggests that social interactions lead to continuous step-by-step changes in child's thought and behavior that can vary greatly from culture to culture. So Vygotsky places more emphasis on cultures affecting cognitive development. This contradicts Piaget's views of universal stage and content of development. So Vygotsky does not refer to stages in the way that Piaget does. Hence, Vygotsky assumes cognitive development varies across culture, whereas Piaget states cognitive development is mostly universal across culture. So Vygotsky places more emphasis on the role of language in cognitive development. According to Piaget, language depends on thought for its development. Thought more comes before language. So for Vygotsky, thought and language are initially separate systems from the beginning of life, merging at around 3 years of age, producing verbal thought or English speech. For Vygotsky, cognitive development results from an internalization of language. Sociocultural theory is an emerging theory in psychology that looks at the important contributions that society makes to individual development. This theory stresses the interactions between developing people and the culture in which they live. Vygotsky believed that we develop through our social interactions, and this makes perfect sense, doesn't it? After all, we spend many years learning from our parents, teachers, even our friends. They also have a big influence on us. It would be really hard to consider anything we've learned without someone's help. So let's look at 3 of Vygotsky theories. First, we have knowledgeable other. This is simply a person who has knowledge or skills that we don't have. So, for example, it could be parents, could be teachers, or could be one of your peers such as classmates or one of your friends. Next, we have scaffolding. Now, as you can see from the picture, scaffolding are basically platforms that workers use to reach the second or third floor. So, what Vygotsky is saying here is that we use the other as scaffolding as a support that helps us to reach a higher level of development. Next, we have zone of proximal development. So in the picture here, the first floor contains all the skill and knowledge you already have. It's basically you could do on your own without anyone helping you. The second floor, on the other hand, is the zone of proximal development. It's the level that's just above that you can reach if you just have some help from someone from the second floor. One of those second floor, more knowledgeable others. Now, the third floor, on the other hand, that wouldn't be zone of proximal development because it's too high up. So, for example, suppose someone on the second floor, a more knowledgeable other, reaches down to give you some help, they can pull you up because they're just little above you. On the other hand, third floor tries to help you with a hand up, but they can't because they're just too high up. Now you can reach, but it's just too far beyond your level. So the idea here is there's a certain level of knowledge and skills that you're already capable of, but then one level up just above what you're currently able to do, someone can help you to get to that level. So you just need a little help there. For example, one culture teaches children to play with toys while the other encourages them to play outdoors. Children from both cultures adapt to their culture teach them. If a culture encourages talking, they will learn to do so.